And frankly, if you're going to sell a game for full price at the most expensive it's ever been, it's going to be at launch. And the weird thing about that high price is that you're buying what will most likely be the worst version of the game. It's such a strange idea, isn't it? The idea of early adoption. The idea that you pay the most, and yet you get the least. You get the worst experience. If you bought that game or that product sometime down the line, you probably not only have it cheaper, but you would get a better product, a product with less problems. It seems so backwards when you sit down and think about it. If you sit down and think about it, really, nobody should be buying games on launch, and yet, if they didn't, those games would be dead on arrival. It's so strange when you sit down and think about it. This industry and many others, especially when it comes to the technology sector, are driven by this idea of early adoption. And yet, early adopters always get the worst product. And yet, especially in an age of multiplayer games, you can't avoid having early adopters. They're essential. You need that explosion of a player base at the start. You need a bunch of people playing in order to make that game viable and keep it alive. It's not only that, though. You're competing for a very, very small slice of the pie at a time when more developers and more publishers than ever are trying to take a slice for themselves. There are only so many video games that your average consumer can buy, and there are only so many video games that your average consumer can play on a daily basis. If you want to punch your way into the market and make your product relevant for any length of time, you have to have a strong launch in order to do that. There are very few examples of games that have become popular weeks or months after their launch. There are some, but they are the exception rather than the rule. Like it or not, launch is the most important part of a product's life cycle. As long as that continues to be the case, launch reviews will define that product forever. It is very, very rare indeed to see a product recover from a consensus that it is poor upon launch. Now, you might be thinking, well, that can't be true because there are plenty of games and movies and books that have been considered cult classics despite being panned by the critics at the time. Yeah, that's true, but when it comes to games, they are a very unique format in the sense that technical issues and problems with the software can be a much bigger issue than, say, the storyline or the casting or many of the other things that define whether or not a movie or another static piece of media is good.
The most harmful thing is the fact that pre-order bonuses and the fact that people are willing to actually pre-order to begin with have encouraged horrible development practices over the course of the years. Now, I'm talking about the notion of taking content that was intended for the game and splitting it off as a pre-order bonus. I'm talking about wasting the time of developers to create specific content for different retailers. I'm talking about the notion that when you buy the game, you can't ever have the complete experience because you didn't buy it from 7 major retailers at once, right? You should never be splitting off parts of the game prior to release in order to incentivize purchase or pre-purchase from various different places. I've told you about how Day 1 DLC is essentially one of the absolute worst things to ever happen to the games industry. Pre-order bonuses are pretty much on that level, and yet they keep doing it because it works, because people will willingly pre-order the game. Jesse Schell stated that you get this plan in your mind when it comes to purchase, and deviating from that plan isn't something you want to do. And when you put money down, and this is my speculation, I'm pretty sure it's not his, but the idea is pretty much the same thing. When you put money down, that's a part of your plan. That's a stepping stone towards buying the title. So you become more committed to buying it. You become more likely to actually pick it up in the first place. Even though you know that you haven't really invested anything, you've still put some money down. It's a little bit easier. It's a little bit cheaper on launch day for you, even though it's the same price anyway. You just happen to have split some of the cost. So that's why GameStop does it, because they realize it's an effective tactic to make people pre-order and actually convert that pre-order into a real sale. And for what? What did you gain? A skin pack? Some free game that you could have picked up for $3 on 25 different Steam sales in the past? Some dumb rifle? You're throwing $50 to $60 at a title you know nothing about except for carefully crafted marketing material. How many times do people have to get burned by this?
What you just heard is from a couple of videos made in 2013 and 2016 by one of the most important voices in the video game community, Totalbiscuit. I think it's safe to say times have changed since then. The industry of video games has been a way of escapism from the real world, such as the predecessors of old, like the original 1993 Doom or Duke Nukem, where the main focus was only the gameplay. Over the years, the industry grew stronger and innovated into better graphics, mechanics, and leaned more into storytelling. To paint a picture of how much this industry has grown, here's a list of some games that came out in 2001. Halo, Super Smash Bros. Melee, Sonic Adventure 2, Final Fantasy X, Jak and Daxter, Silent Hill 2, Red Faction, Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2, Pikmin, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Devil May Cry, Grand Theft Auto 3, Metal Gear Solid 2, and Animal Crossing. Bear in mind, this was the start of the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and original Xbox generation, with the N64's life cycle coming to an end. Let's jump forward a couple years to 2007. These titles were during the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and the Nintendo Wii generation. Halo 3, Mass Effect, LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga, God of War 2, The Witcher, Team Fortress 2, Portal, Crysis, Crackdown, Guitar Hero, Rock Band, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, BioShock, Uncharted, Stalker, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Super Mario Galaxy. Let's go even a step further into 2008. Dead Space, Grand Theft Auto 4, Fallout 3, Metal Gear Solid 4, Left 4 Dead, Fable 2, Gears of War 2, Far Cry 2, Mirror's Edge, Persona 4, Devil May Cry 4, Call of Duty World at War, Super Smash Bros. Brawl, Soul Calibur 4, Star Wars The Force Unleashed, Saints Row 2. These generations were consistently making a number of quality IPs annually, with a few bad ones in between of course, nothing's perfect, and they would be remembered by players of today and probably replayed in later years due to the quality and content. According to Forbes, the video game industry was valued at $184.4 billion in 2022. Compared to the other branches of the entertainment industry, the music industry was valued at $26.2 billion in 2022, and the movie industry's box office was at $26 billion. Despite the value, there wasn't a huge roster of highly anticipated video games in 2020 like the previous years. If anything, there was Ghost of Tsushima, Cyberpunk 2077, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Doom Eternal, Genshin Impact, Half-Life Alyx, Call of Duty Cold War, Ori and the Will o' the Wisps, The Last of Us Part 2, Fall Guys, Spider-Man Miles Morales, and Valorant. Now, I wanted to show you some pieces of Totalbiscuit's videos because I found myself reflecting on some of his work, right as Mind's Eye came out with as many technical issues as it did. It reminded me of other bad launches, Assassin's Creed Unity and Mass Effect Andromeda to name a few. A lot of what Totalbiscuit said in his videos then still rings true today. This also includes the so-called quadruple A game from Ubisoft. I couldn't even remember the name of it without looking it up. Skull and Bones, forgotten after years of being delayed post-reveal at one of the E3 presentations. While I was searching for what was released in 2020, there was a load of titles that failed miserably. Marvel's Avengers, Watch Dogs Legion, and Warcraft 3 Reforged, just to name a few. It's crazy to think of how we got to this point in time where quality has dropped. Even 2016 was a better year for video games, the start of Overwatch and the return of Doom with Mick Gordon's soundtrack. Cyberpunk in particular became a massive disappointment on launch, damaging the reputation of the industry as a whole. This is especially true for the development team CD Projekt Red, who were known for The Witcher 3, one of their most well-received games in recent memory. This would be a precursor to what would be happening in years to follow. Incomplete games on launch day, a focus on microtransactions, day one DLCs or special editions that exist only for key jangling, and the addition of companies using similar models without actually making a difference or innovation in mechanics. In this video, I'm going to cover the current state the industry is in, a state of decline and the negative cause and effects. So, where to start looking? Let's begin. Let's wind the clock back to 2023. There were a few games that got positive praise for some time. Resident Evil 4 Remake, Lies of P, Amnesia the Bunker, and Hi-Fi Rush, just to name a few. There were also a lot of disappointments. We'll start with an easy one called Redfall, which collapsed due to a live service system, bugs, cheap graphics, and broken AI.
Well, first test here. Do the windows break? First test here. Oh no!
Strangely enough, this wasn't a game that Arcane Studios wanted to make. What's been cited as the key factor in Redfall's collapse has been the poor direction, concept, and lack of interest in making multiplayer games. Imagine that. Which then leads to the inevitable shutdown of Redfall. The biggest hope from the development team was that, quote, that the title would be restarted and be a single player, unquote. Another example, Payday 3. A lot of hype was built on the sequel. Payday 2 was a massive DLC-bloated title from Overkill and Starbreeze, totaling at about 77 DLC packs, the cost reaching about $245 US. Payday 3 ended up being a disappointing sequel to its predecessor. The problems were present right at launch. A live service game that requires a constant internet connection, and was largely considered unfinished. There were a few neat features as upgrades to its previous entry, but it fell flat due to a terrible matchmaking system, poor gameplay loop, and absolutely abysmal leveling system. In order to level up, you had to use each weapon individually in order to actually increase your level. Whether this has changed, I'm not sure, but first impressions are very important. Third example, Forspoken, a bare-bones open-world RPG from Square Enix. When I say bare-bones, I mean that the gameplay loop is basically a collect-a-thon open world, which makes the exploration of said open world to feel tedious and unrewarding. The biggest result, however, of this title ended up being possibly the worst dialogue written in the AAA sphere.
Oh, damn! Oh my god, that was insane.
That'll teach you.
Yeah, what he said.
I just move shit with my freaking mind! Yeah, okay, that is something I do now. I do magic, talk sensitive cups, kill jacked up beasts, snort.
Damn it, Wade!
For our fourth example, it's Starfield, Bethesda's biggest failure due to being unfinished, boring, and having paid mods. It was forgotten within a few weeks, regardless of whatever controversies it garnered. Unlike Skyrim, which is kept alive by a large modding community, thanks to a much stronger foundation. Even Fallout 4 has a larger community keeping it alive, despite it arguably being the weakest in the franchise. Now, all of these examples were given the same criticism at launch. unfinished, and unpolished. Is it any wonder that Baldur's Gate 3 got praise for at least feeling like a finished game? For context, Baldur's Gate 3 centers itself around the Dungeons & Dragons system, allowing a lot of customization in how the player wants to play. Consider that Baldur's Gate 3 started as an early access project in 2020. At that time, you could only do the first act of the story. There's a benefit to that route. Taking player feedback before release as long as some progress is made. Looking at you, 7 Days to Die. The scale of this game is massive, having different dialogue and scenarios take place, depending on how the player built their character or party. And I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that the characters of Baldur's Gate 3 are going to be remembered for some time, to the same degree as BioWare's characters in Dragon Age 1 or Mass Effect 1 and 2. Just 1 and 2.
Oops.
The reason I bring up Baldur's Gate 3 is that there was a point being made that the rest of the video game industry should put as much effort in as Larian Studios did. One would think with the budgets that AAA studios get, this would be an easy task to fulfill. In a redacted document of an Xbox Federal Trade Commission case, Last of Us 2 had a budget of $220 million, and Horizon, the Forbidden West, cost $212 million. And according to Medium, Starfield had a budget between $300 to $400 million after development went on for 8 years. So, what's the estimation on Larian Studios' budget for Baldur's Gate 3? Roughly $100 million. What the fuck? This situation gets a lot more confusing when we put Alan Wake 2 into account with its $70 million budget. And that has reportedly not made its money back until a year later. There's a lot of factors in play, exclusivity on Epic Games for PC and no physical copies until much later. The argument isn't solely on budget costs. Annual IPs like Call of Duty, Madden, and FIFA games still make a lot of money. Call of Duty Vanguard's profit almost reached $1 billion within a month. This doesn't necessarily make them good games by default, obviously. The profits made versus the budget simply highlights the arguments surrounding Baldur's Gate 3. You don't need a massive budget for success, just a good functioning game with respectable business practices. Also, being a $60 game while others are now shooting for $70 to $80 makes that purchasing decision really easy. When Baldur's Gate 3 reached success, an opinion started to bounce around that other studios should strive in making games at the same level of quality as Baldur's Gate 3, if not higher. Developers pushed back, arguing that it's simply an anomaly due to Larian Studios taking a huge risk with their circumstances, and that the process cannot be replicated. Well, isn't that just a fact in video game development? You're always taking a risk when starting a new project, since it could always fail at launch or something. LA Noire, for example, was a huge risk for Rockstar. It was completely outside of the chaotic formula in Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead Redemption, a slower cinematic form of gameplay. Expedition 33 was also a huge risk coming from a smaller studio. Sandfall Interactive's first game with roughly 30 people, starting development in 2020. Most of the crew are apparently former Ubisoft employees. The founder specifically stated he was bored at Ubisoft and wanted to do something brand new. Taking a risk with Expedition 33 probably sounded more exciting. This brand new idea ended up being a very well received turn-based strategy, a classic style from titles like Final Fantasy. Thus, Expedition 33 reignited the point that Baldur's Gate 3 was making. Stellar Blade prompted the same question, a game that came from a studio with a resume of mobile games. Now, when covering the defense of how difficult it would be to replicate a product to be similar to Baldur's Gate 3, that essentially means nothing. Especially for AAA studios with these massive budgets. Indie studios have a lot more to risk to their projects. Take for example Resident Evil 4, the original in 2005. This one game completely changed another and convinced EA, of all companies, to allow a brand new IP, Dead Space, to be developed. Former Visceral Games designer Ben Wannett describes the events like this, quote, "It was at a time at EA when there was no appetite for original IP. It seemed like everyone else was doing it except for us. I was working on another game that got cancelled. and EA was trying to get me to work on something I didn't want to work on, and I was like, no, I want to work on Dead Space or I'm going to quit. It was very interesting to get those two things together and see that something special was taking shape, but we do owe tremendously to Resident Evil 4. We were really big fans. We had so many of those water cooler moments after that game came out." Unquote. Dead Space managed to stand out on its own as a brand new IP and be profitable, only to be destroyed by EA, but that's a different story. There doesn't have to be any requirement of replication, it's not what people are requesting the AAA studios to do. The director of Baldur's Gate 3 said it best. "This is video games. Standards just die every day. Things get reinvented. New things appear all the time. When I was starting out in the industry, Assassin's Creed set the new standard. It was over. Nobody could make games like Assassin's Creed. There was too much budget behind it. That was going to be the future. Everybody had to consolidate, blah blah blah." That didn't materialize. In video games, there's so much free space to explore still in the creative tree. I think that describes an entertainment industry best. Innovation and creativity unstifled by a mandatory checklist. It doesn't have to pride itself on being the most expensive title or biggest entry in history. Take it from the indie games that blew up, made by one person. Phasmophobia, Lethal Company, Schedule 1, Stardew Valley, Undertale, Papers, Please. The request is pretty simple, just make a good game. Is that really so hard? Apparently so. One of the biggest reasons I wanted to make this video is the event that took place with Helldivers 2. It got a lot of praise for just being a fun and simplistic PvE game, despite whatever flaws were present. What put Helldivers 2 into a massive spotlight is what its publisher pulled on the community, a requirement to have a PlayStation account on PC platforms. The problem is that the PlayStation Network doesn't exist in all countries around the world, so you essentially just blocked out people that already bought your game. Scummy doesn't even come close to defining this. Hard to say if this story would be any different if the PSN was required on launch day, but the fact remains that it's not in favor of the potential buyers for your game. The Helldivers 2 community had then got together to voice their opinion on Steam and other platforms of social media, negatively reviewing the game just for the PSN requirement. This surprisingly worked. Kind of, anyway. Sony pulled back on the plan to force the PS Network into Helldivers 2, which ultimately showed what kind of power the consumer has. It was a very interesting time, to say the least. The kind of part is that Sony still pushed forward with the requirement. Some countries still cannot access Helldivers 2 due to the restriction. This was followed up with a few single-player games, or used to at one point, Ghost of Tsushima, God of War Ragnarok, and apparently Helldivers 2 Steam page still says so that's confusing. For the single-player games, I believe that requires an internet connection for the PSN account dependency. Wonderful. So was the Helldivers 2 pushback a victory after all this time? At best, it shows what consumers can do with enough pushback. The lesson is that money talks. It's the language that is universally understood. Executives have far too much control. Taking action and voicing your displeasures in any company's practices can cause change quickly if you simply use your wallet, or get the word out to the public to affect the profits. Imagine if Sony had kept pushing forward and had to lay off the entire Helldivers 2 staff due to a player drought or a massive amount of refunds. This whole turn of events was in the middle of Helldivers 2's peak. Having a problem right at launch is a different story. Launch day is incredibly important, obviously. It's basically like the box office opening day for movies. $60 titles were already pricey enough. Some were pushing for $70, but the major red flag is the special editions and day one DLCs. A great example of this is Assassin's Creed Shadows, or rather the overall Ubisoft model apparently, since Star Wars Outlaws practically did the same thing. All it offered is a season pass, early access, and a pack that consists of digital items, all for a small fee. And since this was a pre-order, It's a blatant concern on whether the game is any good to begin with. It's not just a risk for the developers to release a product. It's a risk for the consumer to buy a product that isn't even out yet. You have the option to refund at your disposal, but there's a chance that said product might be in development hell and never be released. It's blind trust. It's willingly purchasing something that you've only seen previews of without having the product in your possession. You might recall how much of a mess the PC port of Batman Arkham Knight was, ported by a third-party company instead of their main studio, Rocksteady. Frames weren't consistent, and there were major graphical problems right at launch, which just shows how much of a gamble pre-ordering launch day titles can get. And that game in particular had loads of pre-order bonuses out of the gate. So the question is it really worth betting on an IP for something to be good? Is that just an absolute certainty if a game is attached to an IP? Frankly, I doubt it. One example I want to briefly touch on is Vampire the Masquerade 2, which was announced back in 2019. That game has been passed off to 2 different companies, with directors being dropped from the position. A total of 2 delays. On January 31st, 2024, we got a gameplay trailer to finally see how things are going. It's not going great. But to really put the nail in the coffin for the old fans of the first game, content was locked off with a paywall on release. People obviously weren't happy with that knowledge. Despite the paywall being lifted, there's still the matter of the base game, as many of the RPG elements from the first game appear to be absent in development. Essentially, my point is this. Let's say you've wishlisted or pre-ordered a game, whether it's a popular IP or not, doesn't matter. Then 4 to 5 years later, it comes out and what you got was utter disappointment. Your expectations after that might just hit a new low. Let's move on to Day 1 DLC. The patient zero of these Day 1 specials started with Dragon Age 2 in 2011, where story content called The Exiled Prince was found in the files but locked behind a paywall, so even on launch day, players weren't getting the full experience. The same company, EA and BioWare, would do that again in 2012 with the much anticipated Mass Effect 3. Another crucial story pack, called From Ashes, on launch day was locked off. This included a critically important companion of the lore that would be available for the entire story. Again, cutting out content from those that wouldn't pay for it. It's blatantly milking the consumer for maximum profit, and that's before we found out about Mass Effect 3's ending. For further discussion, I'm gonna let Totalbiscuit do the talking.
Let's just say that breaking review embargo is something you will only really do once, because once the word gets around, nobody is going to talk to you anymore. No more PR agencies will actually deal with you. So for the most part, publishers have gaming media by the balls in that respect. They can't risk breaking embargo because it's too damaging for their business, and by the time those reviews actually come out, the game's top seller on Steam. I mean, hell, it was top seller on Steam yesterday and the game wasn't even out yet. It boggles my mind. It really does. It blows me away. There's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is this is our fault for being stupid enough to continue to pre-order these titles when there is no benefit to it whatsoever. It's not even a case of it being no benefit, it's actively damaging the games industry. It's not just like, oh, right, okay, I took a hit for $60. No, you're encouraging terrible business practice. You need to stop it. You really, really do. The good news is it's entirely within our hands. We actually have the opportunity to derail this entire business practice. And you know what we need to do? Learn a bit of patience. It really is that simple. Learn a bit of patience. Those of you sensible enough to be patient and not pre-order Aliens Colonial Marines now have at your disposal a wealth of reviews. The vast majority of them say this game is a stinker and you should not be dropping $50-$60 on it. And that's good. You were patient. And as a result, you were rewarded. Everything is in your favor. If the game had turned out to be good, you could have gone right onto Steam and just bought it right there. Oh, so you miss out on a skin pack or the sharp rifle. Who bloody cares? These things are meaningless. Don't be suckered in. In the case of Tomb Raider, oh, well, I missed out on a free copy of Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light that I could play right now. Let's be honest here. If you actually wanted to play Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light, you would have bought it anyway. I mean, for God's sake, it's been part of so many Steam sales. That game has been out for years. This is not a big bonus to you. If you intended to play it, rather than just add it to your Steam shelf and say, hey, look, I've got an extra game which I'm never going to play, you would have already played it. Tomb Raider might be great. I mean, all signs are pointing to it being pretty good, right? But you don't know that yet. So why would you buy it? I mean, it's just insane. Do you do this with anything else in your life, or is it just games? If it's just games, then take a good hard look at your consumer practices. Take a good hard look at what you do as a consumer and think, is this screwing me? Because the chances are it is. Now, some people are going to come back and say, well, I would have bought it anyway. And there's a big problem, isn't it? Because with Aliens Colonial Marines, you've got a game that a lot of people would have bought anyway because it's an Aliens game. They are loyal to the franchise. They are loyal to the brand. And that's terrible. The reason it's terrible is because these are the guys that go into full-on Stockholm Syndrome, cognitive dissonance fanboy mode as soon as anyone criticizes this game. Here's what's going to happen. The people that pre-ordered this game are going to be split into one of two camps. There's going to be the guys that are like, I got burned hard. And then there are going to be the other guys who say, no, this game's great. This game is incredible. No, guys, you're really missing out. And then actually get super defensive of the game. Why would they get super defensive of it? Because they drop money on it, and they can't be wrong.
Consider the following games that have brought this problem to light.
We'll get the big one out of the way. Cyberpunk 2077, CD Projekt Red's most ambitious project, with a bunch of trailers building the hype up.
We've greatly enhanced our crowd and community systems to create the most believable city in any open-world game to date. The city's streets are bustling with crowds of people from all facets of life, all living their lives within a full day and night cycle.
Fast forward to its launch day, and behold, it was the biggest disappointment of 2020. Or at least one of them. 3 years later, the Phantom Liberty expansion/DLC would come out with a large number of patches to fix the base game. Sounds great. However, the damage is already done from launch day. There's no patch to start fixing that. Not only has it been burned into memory now, it's been cremated. Same thing applies to No Man's Sky. The patches for that game have fixed it tremendously. But again, the damage is done. The reputation is going to be incredibly difficult to repair.
As soon as people see that company logo, it's going to be immediate flashbacks to broken promises.
It's good that they're rebuilding it, but it takes a lot of work to get back in good graces because memory is such a fickle matter.
One example I want to draw from is a development team called Teon, specifically on their RoboCop Rogue City game. It's fairly decent, and it respects the IP. In short, it's an overall fun game that prides itself on creating an authentic experience of the RoboCop movies. Highly recommended despite some of the issues you can find.
And it has been positively well received. This is the same company that made Rambo the video game in 2014.
A first-person shooter stuck on rails that just replayed scenes from the movies with horribly animated QTEs in order to create the illusion of interactive gameplay. It garnered attention from Angry Joe's review and got destroyed for being unbelievably bad.
He's a man, not a god. Come on, comrades. He's a man, not a god. Come on, comrades. He's a man, not a god. He's a man, not a god. He's a man, not a god.
Took a while, but Teon is in a better spot than they used to be. Weird how that works, isn't it? You make a good game and suddenly people like you? Huh.
Another great example is Halo Infinite. There was loads of content missing on release for its multiplayer. Forge was delayed for years. So many modes were missing, such as Firefight, Juggernaut, and Infection, things that were already present in the past. How about Call of Duty's Modern Warfare 3 remake? The lowest rated of the franchise on Steam for having, quote, a short, shallow campaign and thin multiplayer offering. It was also filled with recycled multiplayer maps, barely working servers, unreliable hit detection, and reskinned assets from the Battle Royale mode, Warzone, as many players have reported since its release. Another game that comes to mind is Mass Effect Andromeda, arguably where BioWare, once a big name in RPGs, started to fall apart, especially on release.
Sorry, my face is tired from dealing with everything.
The problem I want to address is that loyalty to a brand ultimately means surrendering morals without question. There's a reason why the word fan is in the word fanatic. What difference does it make if you miss out on a pre-order bonus, a launch day DLC, or special editions? Very little. It'll probably be available on a sale or outdone in a couple of months anyway. We'll close this point on a crucial part of Totalbiscuit's pre-orders video, a quote that should be taken as cautionary advice.
I mean, what's the worst thing about being suckered in to a pre-order for a game that's terrible, right? Well, the worst thing is having to admit that you were the sucker. Nobody likes to think they're suckers. Nobody. And as a result, they'll make up excuses. It is a nasty cycle. Stop being involved in it, please. Think very, very hard before you pre-order a game. Think, well, would I have bought this anyway? Am I such a huge fan of the series that even if 20 reviews from people that I trusted came out and said, this is dreadful, even if my friends who I trust came and said to me, this is dreadful, even under those circumstances, I still would have bought the game and I still would have played it anyway. If you are in that situation, all right, pre-order. Fine. If you have even the slightest doubt, for the love of God, wait. Please wait. You are doing more damage to yourself and to the industry than you can possibly realize. We as consumers have the ability to stop this bullshit for good. And we're the only ones who can do that. Publishers aren't going to do it. Devs aren't going to do it. It's up to you. Will you be part of that solution? Will you help fix this? Or will you continue to be part of the problem? I guess that's up to you.
If there's one language that most companies understand, it's profit. The problem, however, is that the language keeps changing. DLC isn't entirely new. Expansion packs were part of video games for quite some time, and they contained a lot of content that would change the base game. Examples include Empire at War, Galactic Battlegrounds, GTA 4, Fallout 3 and New Vegas, The Sims 2, Warhammer 40k Dawn of War, and StarCraft, to name a few. This would include mechanics, story content, weapons, factions in some cases, more maps, and ways to play. More bang for your buck, so to speak. Monetization was in a very relaxed state, and developers worried more about the base game. It's what the consumer paid for, after all.
Additionally, since the price of games during the PS2 and Xbox generation was just $50 US, there was less of a risk back then when considering wages. Of course, we'd be talking about physical discs and not the digital stores like Steam or GOG, changing the market entirely for the cheaper titles from indie developers. You'd have to also account for inflation. The price wouldn't be the same if it had to be calculated into a different market.
The monetization of video games would change with the use of DLC content to microtransactions. The patient zero of this was in 2005. A little game called Cameo, Elements of Power, with a Microsoft Marketplace item offer that was purely cosmetic for $2. During the concept of microtransactions with the Xbox Live service, General Manager Cam Ferroni said the following, quote, "Generally, if you do anything less than $5, you end up eating up the bulk of that $5 in transaction fees. At the heart of it, it'll be a points-like system where you buy points and then use those points to make purchases."
The next quote, however, you're gonna want to strap in. It's a doozy. It's from a professor at Indiana University, Edward Castronova. Back in 2005, he said, and I quote, "Not only do you have to sweep away the distinction between virtual and real, you have to stop looking at video games as a toy and start looking at them as an entertainment service." Unquote.
Oh, wonderful. This is where Bethesda came in for the Horse Armor Pack for Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, for roughly $2. The reception for it wasn't so much that the cosmetic was dull, but rather the existence and price for it in a single-player game. Which seems like such a smaller issue compared to today's microtransactions, optional or not.
Never forget when Bethesda tried to monetize mods for Skyrim. You know, the one thing that allows you to personally add in what you want into the game.
Juxtapose the Horse Armor Pack with Overwatch 2 and Diablo 4's cosmetic and you can find a huge price gap. Diablo's price shoots at about $28 for a single cosmetic set. Consider that the base game is at the price of $50 with multiple additions. You can't even call it a microtransaction because the price doesn't come across as micro. Now with Overwatch 2, a free-to-play title, the prices of old skins got bumped way higher than the older version it replaced. The first two sections in this chart represent in-game currencies, so the longer it takes to get the skin you want, the more tempting it is to just get out your wallet in order to save time from the grind. Never mind that Overwatch 1 had a price tag. So people that did pay for the original game have already spent a lot. Think about that. We have $60 to $70 games that come out with the story content, mechanics, voice acting and sound mixing, and we're supposed to believe that a skin, a cosmetic, is worth a third of that price tag. Absolutely farcical to think that that kind of logic sounded okay to someone. Let's briefly bring up the term microtransaction. It's fairly simple. One would think that the micro part would be $1 at least or $5 at most. But no, we get skin packs that are far too close to the cost of a fully released game. Just calling it a microtransaction is a deflection to how far these monetization practices can go. Free-to-play titles also use these prices as a shield, as if they're somehow immune to criticism of cosmetics that cost more than $10. So far I've only covered cosmetics.
There have been times where mechanics have been altered by microtransactions. The term pay to win comes to mind, and in some cases, primarily in single player, it hurts the experience. It makes it feel like you're missing the fully intended content. I'll give you an example. Dead Space 3, the sequel that effectively killed the franchise. Most of that game is just fine until you find the newly added scrapbox mechanic, where Isaac can place it in a remote area to collect resources for crafting and resources. These help with weapon upgrades and suit upgrades, things that are tied to the mechanics.
At the crafting bench, there is an option to purchase upgrades that make the scrapbot collect more and at a faster rate, directly affecting the gameplay. As a result, it damages the experience, as it is purely predatory to people struggling with completing the game. This also means time was spent with the development team that could have been spent on other parts of the game.
Let's look at another example. Mortal Kombat 1. These sequel names. So Mortal Kombat 1 was released with paid fatalities, one of the most well-known core pieces of the franchise. How did that even... Halo Infinite is an interesting case, as it was the first time the multiplayer portion was free to play, while the single-player campaign was $60 on release. Infinite took a strange approach to microtransactions. It's all cosmetic, but some are just colors for your armor. Not even singular colors, just combinations of different palettes. Did any of the previous Halo games, minus Halo 4 and 5, try that? No, I didn't think so.
In fact, back in 2010, the way you used to grind cosmetics in Halo Reach was by playing the game. Shocking, I know. Anytime that there is a way to get an advantage by paying for something in a video game, it should be condemned post-haste, whether that be a single-player game or a multiplayer game. There shouldn't be a time where whoever has the bigger wallet in the match is the winner. Now, I'm going to refer to this chart, primarily on the right-hand side, for a specific reason, and that is because of that massive output for free-to-play mobile games, which is $93 billion in revenue in 2021. Mobile games have been the catalyst of how we got to today. The amount of money those games make is astronomical in places like China, where some games that are playable on PC are also available on mobile devices, such as Dead by Daylight. Never mind that the mobile version was shut down in March of 2025. I imagine a lot of grinding and paid cosmetics were lost, since there's no cross-progression. The revenue from mobile games is primarily from microtransactions that tempt people into getting more out of something, like a level or more lives, instead of waiting for a couple hours for a refresh. That has crept its way into the rest of the games industry. First it was microtransactions, then it became the infamous loot box system.
Loot boxes, oh boy, this practice gotten a lot of attention. Games like Overwatch put them into full view, with some videos on YouTube being nothing but a spree of opening loot boxes.
In Overwatch, they're purely randomized cosmetics, but the fact remains that you can purchase more boxes, thus making it a clear case of gambling due to the random nature of loot boxes.
Slowly but surely, loot boxes got more devious with the content of the rewards being attached to a game's mechanics. Middle-earth, Shadow of War, was probably one of the more egregious of the bunch, as the orcs that are a part of your army to defend your fortress or attack others can permanently die, so it's right back to the loot box system to get your forces back to full strength. It could deliberately make your forces vastly overpowered to the AIs with legendary... I can't believe I'm saying this, legendary or epic orcs. By the time I was collecting B-roll for this game, Shadow of War was apparently planning to shut the monetization down. So clearly it wasn't working out. The one game that got the most attention, however, to no surprise, was Star Wars Battlefront 2, EA. Uttering the words pride and accomplishment to defend loot boxes was unfathomable, but it happened. And it's not the only term that was memorialized. The contents of Battlefront's loot boxes were all gameplay-related boosts known as star cards, giving power to players for their abilities, weapons, and heroes. A pure example of pay-to-win to skip the grind of Battlefront 2. EA. And it gets even worse when you just load up the game and see an option to get more loot boxes right at the main menu, just to remind you where the priorities are. One of the biggest problems I would argue is that EA aimed this business practice at an audience that would be loyal to the Star Wars brand no matter what. The audience was going to be huge regardless of the quality, so the amount of money Battlefront 2, EA, would get from the loot boxes and sales would heavily damage the industry. All of this, plus the rising problem of loot boxes as a gambling addiction, garnered so much attention that the government got involved, gifting us some glorious clips from the representatives at EA and Epic Games.
It arouses suspicion that this is not something we can discuss, because obviously for our inquiry this is fairly basic information. We don't need to know your corporate secrets, but to get a sense of what people, a normal player, a normal frequent player's engagement with the game, the amount of time they would typically play. Of course it will vary, but I'm sure that you've got an idea of what the answers to those questions are.
I'm sure Epic I'm confident that Epic as a company has the means to track and understand the finer points of player engagement. Neither of us are in the data analytics department who would oversee that kind of effort. And I think more to the point here, at a very fine and specific point like that, we would consider it commercially sensitive. And I would also, as a side note, I would disagree with the statement that Epic makes money from people playing it. The game's the Battle Royale mode is free to play, so people playing it doesn't. You're
not charity, are you?
We aren't.
You're not creating a free-to-play game for the joy of it.
Correct.
You know, you don't make money out of it. I mean, you're nothing wrong with being a commercial entity, but let's not beat around the bush. You know, you make money out of people playing the game. You know, you can challenge that if you like, but that is the reality of the situation.
Well, I mean, sure, we wouldn't have a viable business if no one played and spent money in it, but I wanted to be careful with language about the notion that playing...
You're the general counsel, that's your job, isn't it?
It is. Yes.
I think you'd agree that a company like yourselves should have a code of ethics. And we've heard a lot of evidence in this committee from Dr. David Zendel, among others, that loot boxes are closely linked to problem gambling, particularly among adolescents. Can I ask you, both companies, do you consider loot boxes to be an ethical feature of your games? Kerry?
Well, first, we don't call them loot boxes. I think that was...
Whatever term you wish to apply to them, do you consider them ethical?
So what we look at as surprise mechanics, but I think it's important to look at this. So if you go to a I don't know what your version of Target is, but a store that sells a lot of toys, and you do a search for surprise toys, what you'll find is that this is something people enjoy. They enjoy surprises, and so it's something that's been part of toys for years, whether it's Kinder Eggs or Hatchimals or LOL Surprise.
We've gone from primarily microtransactions to loot boxes to battle passes. Battle passes are usually in free-to-play games, sometimes in fully priced games. If you somehow haven't encountered these, I'll give you the short of it. Battle passes grant rewards to the player through gameplay, but there's a catch. One section of the Battle Pass is free and gives out very simple rewards, while the good stuff is in the paid portion, usually ranging from $5 to $10. Now in some cases it does give the currency back in the paid portion, but you'd have to consistently play the game in order to get that value back.
I don't know about you, but I don't have a lot of time to play the same game daily to get all the rewards, and even then, I doubt I would use the Battle Pass's cosmetics for long or at all. Obviously, the purpose of them is to induce an incentive to play the game, inject a feeling of missing out if they don't progress the Battle Pass or buy its premium side. Thankfully, it's in an optional section. I just find it odd that they're present in games that you already paid for. There's a few neat examples of what a good Battle Pass looks like. Warframe uses a daily and weekly mission, and the best part? The Battle Pass can't be paid for. Again, the solution for those that don't want to see Battle Passes anymore is pretty simple. Just vote with your wallet and don't be tempted. Similar to avoiding pre-orders, the difference is that one involves patience. I will say that if a Battle Pass is hiding fucking colors, it's incredibly scummy for something so basic being locked off. If anything, the profit problem has been reduced to the background for now. New attempts will probably creep in.
Call of Duty, for example, had recently added in advertisements right at the loadout screens, so that's...
See, in 2017, a team at Electronic Arts published a paper titled EOMM, Engagement Optimized Matchmaking Framework. It was really a watershed moment. The paper suggested that perfectly fair matches are not always the best for keeping players hooked. Instead of only using skill, the EOMM framework added new ingredients to the matchmaking recipe. The first one was churn probability. This is an estimate of how likely you are to quit playing if you have a bad or good experience. The second one were dynamic adjustments. So the system could even change its objective, which is nuts. The researchers then noted that they could retune the matchmaking goal to maximize other things like playtime, retention, or even spending, which is when it gets real creepy. To dumb this down a little bit so it's a little bit easier to digest, EOMM was basically matchmaking meeting data science for the first time ever. So here's how I like thinking about it. I imagine the matchmaking system as a casino dealer who doesn't just deal cards randomly, but also keeps an eye on every player's mood. So if, for example, you're getting upset and might leave the table, the dealer then might just tweak the next round in your favor a little bit. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to keep you in the game. Or if you're winning too much and you're starting to get bored, maybe the next round he gives you a bit more challenge. So I don't think it's outright cheating. The cards are still, dealt from the same deck, but the order of the cards might be influenced by another motive, keep the game going. That's kind of what's going on here. So around the same time, other gaming giants are starting to wake up and are starting to explore very similar ideas. In fact, Activision, they made Call of Duty, filed a patent for a matchmaking system that could encourage microtransactions by pairing players strategically. Wow. It sounds like Activision, to be honest. So here's how it worked. For example, they'll be matching a newbie with a veteran who has a bunch of premium cool gear and then hope that the newbie is going to be enticed to buy that gear. What the fuck? The industry clearly was interested in matchmaking as more than just fair competition. It was becoming a tool to drive player behavior.
It's an obvious telltale sign of the team's priorities along with live service games. Let's focus on the core of a video game. The argument I want to make is in two parts. 1. Some games keep trying to appear innovative when the mechanics they pride themselves on have already been done before. It comes across as a mirage to how shallow the rest of the game is. And 2. There is a model that studios will try to chase in order to maximize profit, only to lose their unique traits in the process. An example of part 1 would be Half-Life 2, which garnered praise for allowing the player to interact with just about any prop on the map. It was considered revolutionary in 2004. It's fair to say that's been translated to VR games, especially with Half-Life Alyx, as there are multiple sections where you can just fiddle around with markers, a piano, and an elevator just to see what the interactions will be. The opposite of said example would be Last of Us 2. The writing prides itself on a dark approach to storytelling. Whether it was on par is a different question. What? The NPCs will react to their companions getting killed, shouting their name in some cases. Other times, they might cower and plead for the player to spare them, even though the NPC resets back into combat after some time.
You don't have to do this. Oh, shit! Alright, just... Don't! Please, don't!
Give me info, I guess. I don't know.
God damn it! Fuck me!
I mean, what do you expect?
Still standing?
It's like, please don't kill me. Now, to draw my gun and aim at you slowly. It's like,
The first thing I have to mention is that I've seen these kinds of reactions in so many other games that I really doubt Last of Us 2's version is remotely innovative. There's no interaction with these NPCs to develop some kind of regret. Take a look at Papers, Please, where you play as a border officer in the fictional land of Arstotzka. You have a set of guidelines, but there are plenty of individuals you'll meet that test your resolve to follow said rules. The first few times you break those rules, you get warnings of a deduction on your payroll, affecting your ability to take care of your own family in the game, a direct contribution to the player's choice. So which do you choose? Help someone get their happy ending, or help yourself in order to have easier progression in the game? Papers, Please is trying to be an effective game, testing morality, while Last of Us 2 is trying to be a cinematic experience, only for it to fall flat from lack of interactivity. It comes across as shallow and desperate to get a reaction. We briefly went over the budget for AAA games. It's usually up to $200 million to $300 million US, due to a much larger team working on it, plus the motion capture, and a focus on a cinematic experience. Those games are totally fine to have around. There's plenty of powerful storytelling potential in these kinds of games. God of War 2018, Ghost of Tsushima, and The Last of Us come to mind. The Resident Evil remakes in particular get a lot of praise for focusing on its characters, despite the sometimes ridiculous events that take place. The question is, should these cinematic games be the standard? No. There's always going to be a risk in running a cutscene for too long. Got to get back to the gameplay at some point. Most of the time, the story doesn't make the game, nor does the graphical detail. At the end of the day, the story of a video game is another cog in the system, not a crutch to lean on. You could have the worst graphics today and still have the best or passable story, as long as the game is fun and engaging. Plenty of studios are chasing the model of having a big cinematic story to tell, to imitate the quality of movies. There's been plenty of times where they've been advertised purely on the experience of the story. For example, Marvel's Avengers from Square Enix and Crystal Dynamics, their attempt at cashing in on the peak of Marvel's cinematic universe. If you haven't heard about it before, don't worry, it's where it belongs right now. The Avengers game ran on a live service model with microtransactions, meaning it was going to be updated over time in order to retain player retention. Despite it being unfinished in some places, agreeable noises.
Doing okay, Hulk?
Agreeable grunt.
It was marketed as a cinematic experience from its trailers, with an easy-to-recognize cast of voice actors in a separate trailer. The prologue trailer was one of the more deceptive ones. This was because there was barely any gameplay trailers or details on the mechanics from the developers. The alpha build of the prologue was divided between 9 minutes and 34 seconds of gameplay, and 8 minutes and 56 seconds of cutscenes. After cutting out the amount of time that the company logos and console ads took up, I then divided up the total of each second spent on cutscenes and gameplay, and we have a presentation that was 48% cutscenes versus 52% gameplay. I would say when you make a gameplay presentation, maybe it's best if the gameplay takes up at least 70 to 80% of the footage. Does that sound like I'm asking too much? I don't think so. If I want to see all the cutscenes, I can just wait for someone to do it on their YouTube channel anyways. Why not show some middle portion of the game instead of the prologue? Showcase how the game works. Anyone remember Dead Island's trailer? Probably one of the best ones out there, only for the release to come out and represent none of what the trailer was about. You can have these cinematic trailers to get people excited, no problem there, but the fact of the matter is that these are video games. I'd like to know how the mechanics work and what kind of gameplay I'll be getting into. Coming back to the Avengers game, when its release came out, it was all coming together. The gameplay was boring and tedious with some of the most generic boss fights you can imagine. Sponge tanks in some cases.
Why is it on fire? Okay, they're not even. What the? Oh my god. So, for some context, it's not supposed to be on fire yet. What the What the Bro, your house is on fire. He's just inside of a tree cooking hot dogs. See, like, this is actual, like, good stuff, but bro's house is on fire while this is going on. Like, he doesn't even realize his house is on fire. He's going right back into the bushes to make his hot dogs. It's so much funnier because they won't even acknowledge that the RV's on fire. Wait, the RV's not on fire anymore. They just teleported inside the house.
That's enough from these Spina.
Let's find the Inhumans.
We found a facility where AIM is preparing to spin up another.
There are big problems with the fundamental design of some enemy types. These large robots, for example, have huge amounts of HP and you have to beat on them forever, but their primary attack is a flame vent that triggers every 2 or 3 seconds whenever you're fighting them. So the actual way to fight this robot is to run up to it, hit it 2 or 3 times, step backwards, rotate 90 degrees, step forward, attack, step back, rinse, repeat. How is this supposed to be fun? But this is nothing compared to the multiplayer bosses. Check this out. This is no exaggeration how you fight endgame bosses in Marvel's Avengers. You just pile onto them and smash buttons.
Should have really taken notes from the old Spider-Man games or the Batman Arkham games. We'll get to you. Another example to briefly examine is Back 4 Blood, which was advertised with the notion that it was made by the creators of Left 4 Dead, which is just a blatant lie. Let's fix the trailer, shall we? There we go. Even if it was true, the game is nothing special. Back 4 Blood isn't just a watered-down version of Left 4 Dead, it's a waterboarded version. It's attached with an incredibly hollow card system in order to masquerade how bland the rest of the game is. Has weak-sounding weapons and a very bland campaign. Not as memorable as any of the Left 4 Dead maps. Here's a quote from a Game Rant article. Quote, also adding to the more serious tone of Back 4 Blood is the way its game mechanics work. Turtle Rock Studios decided to ditch the run and gun feel of Left 4 Dead in favor of a more modern shooting mechanics that involve slowing to aim down sights and prioritizing small weak points as opposed to the general bullet spray of Left 4 Dead. I found the weak point! That isn't an inherently bad thing, but it does give the game a feel closer to that of Call of Duty, and makes it feel a lot more serious as a result. Left 4 Dead always prioritized arcade fun over realism, which added to its self-aware style. Unquote. I'll just go out there and say that fun is usually better than realism.
Gabe had started to develop this theory around interactivity, and the environment needed to let you do what you wanted and then react to it. So if you did something, if you shot your gun, there needed to be a bullet hole in the wall. If you did a thing, people needed, other characters needed to react. The world is acknowledging you exist. The world is acknowledging all of your actions. And that's this huge part of reinforcement.
And you'd have these conversations where you'd be sitting in a design review and somebody'd say, that's not realistic. And you're like, okay, what does that have to, explain to me why that's interesting, because in the real world, I have to write up lists of stuff I have to go to the grocery store to buy. And I've never thought to myself that realism is fun. I go play games to have fun. And so we had to come up with some notion of what fun was. We knew it was an ad hoc definition, and it was the degrees to which the game recognizes and responded to the player's choices and actions, right? You know, in behavioral science, you would say we're explicitly talking about what were reinforcers and what the reinforcement schedules were, right? At that point in time, that was a useful way of making design decisions. The point I would make is, if I go up to a wall and shoot it, to me, it feels like the wall is ignoring me. I'm getting a narcissistic injury when the world is ignoring me. So does this, like, to me, I was trying to convey to the user a sense of, yes, you were making choices, yes, you were progressing, which meant the game had to acknowledge that back to you. If you shoot at a wall, there have to be decals. If you kill a bunch of Marines, the Marines have to run away from you, right? You have to have this sense of the game acknowledging and responding to the choices and actions and progressions that you've made. Otherwise, it loses any sort of impact.
Another common model that's being used is the open world, a term that used to mean no loading screens due to the large levels and no predetermined route of progression. It's been boiled down to a massive map, non-linear mechanics, possibly with minigames dropped in certain areas, a mask to make the game's world look alive. Until you take a deeper look, it just has a lot of filler in it and gets repetitive very quickly. There's a few routes to look at. The Grand Theft Auto franchise in particular,
especially with how much money its fifth title has made. Cyberpunk 2077 ran with a similar concept for a while in one of their trailers, and thus the game's release showed that there was barely anything substantial to do in the entire map. The RPG elements don't change much either. Any choices you make or actions don't really impact the world. It feels static and unresponsive.
Something's wrong.
You want the open world to be interacting and moving on its own with very small scripts here and there, maybe a few influences caused by the player choices. Open worlds get repetitive over time when they have a lot of open space, and there's barely any benefit to you, the player. Linear games will at least hide collectibles in their small confined areas, without making it difficult to explore. The reward usually unlocks optional concept art or secrets you could use. If we take a look at Dead Rising,
I've covered wars, you know.
You've got a large mall filled with zombies and plenty of props to use to defend yourself, but only a set amount of time to manage for the main story. Meanwhile, there are survivors you can find throughout the area that reward you with experience if you escort them to a safe location. Just expect their intelligence to be about as good as a video game journalist.
But wait, there's more. You also have bosses, blenders to combined, edibles, multiple ways to gain experience beside killing zombies, magazines with multiple effects and boosts, weapons to find in their intended store, and of course plenty of opportunities to use your camera in order to get more experience. There's just a ton of stuff to do. The map isn't as large as Skyrim, but it has enough in it to allow the player to do with it as they please. Just you, a bunch of zombies, and a mall full of props and tools. Another example is Deus Ex: Human Revolution. It has a fairly small open world, but there's enough space to allow the player to explore multiple ways to approach a quest. Pretty easy model to fill in. Less is more, and in this case, the less open space you have, the better for any video game striving to have an open world.
Finally, we come to the more obvious model, and it's the modern appeal.
What I mean by that is that there's a constant need to attach something or someone to your game in order to get a specific audience. Wheezy did a great short video on this conundrum for Call of Duty. All the focus of military accuracy and FPS has been melted down into pure advertisement. For some reason, Call of Duty in 2024 added the Gundam mecha suits, Nicki Minaj, and Homelander from The Boys. Stuff that doesn't fit into the art direction of what Call of Duty is. If you compare the very first few Call of Duty games to today's version, they would seem like completely different franchises. Imagine if Dead by Daylight threw in Homelander. It wouldn't exactly fit in, would it? Crossovers like that scream for attention, to get the loyal brand followers to join in without any logic or reason to it, thus damaging what makes the game unique. Starts to be more like Fortnite. Trying to be Fortnite. This is a horse that's been beaten over and over, and it's a model that needs to be tossed away. Fortnite should be its own thing, a battle royale with all the crossovers it tosses in, no denying that. Call of Duty would work better with crossovers like Rambo, Predator, Metal Gear, anything that would keep the military tone so that it doesn't just become part of the same corporate sludge. Without a doubt in my mind, these crossovers make a profit, and as a result, the unique traits of a game disappear. And if every game goes in that direction, then no game will be unique. This last section has been revised so many times. There's always something new going on.
Just the other day I learned about the Nintendo Switch 2 ownership EULA.
That you don't actually own the rights to it? Nintendo can just make it stop working if you mod it yourself, which would mean you just own a license for the Switch 2. I can guarantee you every other company like EA, Activision, and Sony are going to watch this situation very closely to see what they could get away with. Payday 2 recently added in a subscription method for all the DLC they have, so there's definitely an exploitation problem going on. So this next section is tied to all the other problems we've discussed, the culture. Now what I mean by culture is the relations between consumer and producer, which is influenced by various works of art, behavior, and norm practices. A core piece of what ties the industry together, shaped by multiple factors, all that we've covered so far, all of which leads to reputation. What developers do after taking feedback can be a big stepping stone for how they improve. If you just ignore valid criticism or even insult those people, then it's only a matter of time that the self-inflicted wound starts to overflow. It should be a simple thing to build on, respecting the consumer, not the other way around. Respect is earned. The better your relations are, the more respect is going to come your way as a development team. Now, you might be thinking, that's a little obvious, isn't it? Well,
I was curious, I see a lot of mechanics that we've kind of been begging for in Diablo 3 in this. Is there any plans to make this playable on PC, or is this strictly mobile forever?
Are there any, the current plan is to be on mobile, both Android and iOS. We don't have any plans at the moment to do PC. Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones,
got a phone.
right? You can play on your tablet too.
Have you ever thought about adding servers for previous expansions as they were then?
No. And by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't.
Another question, playing Killers was fun a long time ago, but now it's only stressful. Well, that's an opinion, a valid opinion, but that's an opinion. I used to love playing as a killer, win or lose it was fun, but currently no matter what it's just filled with stress and anger. Killers aren't feared anymore. Do you have any plans or ideas how you would like to improve the killer experience? Well, I would say maybe try Survivor for a bit. No, but it's true. I mean, change it up. Maybe you're just tired, you know, or play something else for a week. Try Civilization or something, just for a refreshing change. Balance is, I shouldn't be saying that. Should I be saying that?
Every day, you'll get one free online match. And if you win an online match, you'll earn a free match token. So you'll be able to play the game online every day without spending any additional money. If you want to play more than that, we'll be offering token packs, along with passes that give unlimited access for a week or a month. This new approach means we'll no longer be selling crates or cosmetic items.
I think people are going to love it, and then they're going to understand what we're trying to create and how it links games and entertainment, the functionality of the box, some of the advantages that you get of having a box that is designed to use an online state. So that, to me, is a future-proof choice, and I think people could have arguably gone the other way if we didn't do it, and fortunately we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
Right. So stick with 360, that's your message if you don't, like it?
If you
I think the goal that I had in bringing a lot of the packaged goods folks that we brought into Activision 10 years ago was to take all the fun out of making video games. When we dabbled with backwards compatibility, I can say it is one of those features that is much requested, but not actually used much. That, and I was at a Gran Turismo event recently where they had PS1, PS2, PS3 and PS4 games, and the PS1 and the PS2 games, they looked ancient, like why would anyone play this? I don't think the big huge experiences are going anywhere, but the sooner we go digital as an industry, the better for everybody. Better for consumers, better for the developers and publishers. Maybe it's not so good for retail, but then again if you're selling our games as used copies and incentivizing people to do that, then I don't really feel sorry for you. Randy, this game better not be $80. Don't take that risk. A lot of gamers aren't gonna pay $80 and feed this notion of constant increase of the price tag. You are the CEO. You have some say with the price when it comes to your publisher. A, not my call. B, if you're a real fan, you'll find a way to make it happen. Borderlands 4 maker says your old PC hardware is to blame for the game's poor performance, even though it struggles to run on an RTX 5090. Randy, please put your phone down.
To provide a bigger picture as to how easy it can be for a player base to be exploited, we'll look at a few clear examples. I recently came across the problems Escape from Tarkov was having with a $250 edition that dropped. A paywall that locked off many features from players that already spent at least $150 on a supporter pack in 2022, called Edge of Darkness Promise. The pack did two things. It gave players an edge in the gameplay with perks, so it's basically pay to win, and it promised free access to all DLC that was coming out. So it was seen as a method to support Battlestate games as they created more content. 2 years later, in 2024, they dropped another edition called Unheard, the $250 version. Everyone that owned Edge of Darkness was told to just upgrade to the Unheard, despite the promises of their previous purchase. It was more pay to win than the previous edition, and unlocked an exclusive PvE mode. That's it. I couldn't believe it when I first read it. I checked so many sources just to make sure I wasn't missing something. So, how did Battlestate's team respond to the outrage that obviously followed? It's not DLC, it's a feature.
What the fuck?
Well, it certainly isn't a microtransaction either, pal. But the best part is the apology after all the quote-unquote feedback from the main director himself. First of all, I would like to say that I am very sorry that fans and the game community in general are experiencing these feelings. To translate, sorry I got caught. Whoopsie. Man, I cannot believe this actually happened. I'm flabbergasted. People actually got played like a damn fiddle. Let's look at a few other examples. Activision sent a cease and desist to the team behind Call of Duty Modern Warfare's H2M mod, which was meant to pour more life into Modern Warfare 2's multiplayer on PC, essentially shutting down a fan project that would preserve the 2009 game. This is not the first time this has happened with Activision or any other company. Ubisoft in particular has a really bad quote. An interview they had back in January 2024 revolved around their launcher's new subscription service. We briefly saw that in their pre-order sections. There was a bizarre quote dropped in the middle of it from executive Felipe Tremblay. Quote, "One of the things we saw is that gamers are used to, a little bit like DVD, having and owning their games. That's the consumer shift that needs to happen. They got comfortable not owning their CD collections or DVD collection. That's a transformation that's been a bit slower to happen in games. As gamers grow comfortable in that aspect, you don't lose your progress. If you resume your game at another time, your progress file is still there. That's not been deleted. You don't lose what you've built in the game or your engagement with the game. So it's about feeling comfortable with not owning your game." Unquote. That last part, man, it could get out of hand if, say, the developers decide you don't own their game anymore despite paying for, what, $60 to $70? At that point, you're basically just paying for rent, not owning the game. It justifies the high Cs. I own physical copies of movies and TV shows I like.
It gives me peace of mind that I own it and can watch it whenever. Power of the consumer. You decide what works and what doesn't with your wallet. Not caring about this just makes it potentially worse, and whatever black magic defense there is cannot be justified. It's why indie developers are able to thrive. There's less interference like this. GOG, for example, tries to help with preservation and ownership. Once you buy the game from their store, the install files are available to you. You own them. I believe Steam has a similar process. The Transformer games and Marvel Ultimate Alliance got removed from sales because Activision blatantly lost the license. Yet I can still install and play their campaigns whenever. I have to run some patches sometimes, but they work. At some point you do have to question how long will these older titles be sustained and updated. Do GOG's patches work better than an unofficial patch? A fair concern plagued by time, but it's better than nothing. The issue isn't loss of progress, it's ownership of what you paid for. Just looking at the pricing for some of Ubisoft's games, such as Star Wars Outlaws and Assassin's Creed Shadows, tells me everything I need to know. To avoid it like the plague. They don't respect the consumer and don't deserve any in return. Okay, there's one game I want to specifically focus on, because it's a perfect example of how bad things can get. We finally come back to it. The very title that has put one studio into a new light. Rocksteady. The name that created the Batman Arkham games. Just one game managed to tear that all down. Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League.
I never asked for this.
Even before it was released, it was raising some eyebrows with their gameplay trailer. Heavy air quotes due to it being clearly edited in post. To make the situation even worse, there was also a leak from within the studio. It showed a cutscene of the Arkham Batman we've been playing since the first game, getting shot in the face while being tied up on a bench. What a fucking sentence that is. For some people, this conjured up some concerns from Last of Us 2, which also had a leak of a cutscene through images. The very scene that would live in infamy just with the mere mention of a golf club. All the red flags of a live service game were going off and built no good faith for the gameplay factor. Oh, how naive we were. It was even worse than that. We got slowly moving escort missions, looter-shooter mechanics, floating damage numbers, a messy heads-up display that hinders your vision, mindless point-and-shoot with a hack-and-slash attachment, loot box drop mechanics, a special edition on launch with cosmetic skins, and the story. My god, the story. I can sum it up in one image, and it's roughly within the first hour of the game. The playable characters slowly walk through the Hall of Justice as statues of past heroes, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and The Flash, are being torn down in the background. And that's just the surface level of it. There is no respect for any, and I mean any characters in the story. Its attempts at humor are agonizingly pathetic.
And so the Flash has expired. He saved our lives, yet we ended his. As honorable warriors, we will show proper respect to this fallen hero by...
Show a little class, man. Holy shit. Congratulations.
Makes sense. The gods have cursed you in every other way.
You've already lost, Luther. I am vengeance. I am...
This is the best way to describe this topic at its most basic form. It's a product of the most hostile, vile, dreadful, and painful kind of writing, and it should be called out as such for attempting to destroy the Arkham games, something that plenty of people cherish. The way the Squad game is written comes across as though the people behind it hate what came before. It is tempting to do a video on this game, but I would feel like I committed a war crime just by having it in my library. Thank God it bombed as hard as it did. Complacency would have just opened the door to more disasters like this. Point being that the relation between the player and the developer has gotten astronomically bad. The recent actions of Ubisoft being potentially the worst of it. Being cautious and aware of it is a good place to start. Some studios just have to get the message or crash as hard as Rocksteady has. New attempts will happen, we can't be complacent. It comes down to this. Is it really so difficult to just make a fun video game? Can you really blame people for not being interested in new releases when the behavior of companies is detrimental and provocative to consumers? Cause and effect has been a powerful part of human nature, and it will continue to be that way. To conclude, the video game industry is not in the best state, not at this time anyway. Primarily, my inspiration to work on this video is Totalbiscuit and how most of his videos were purely honest takes at the industry's business practices and why the player base, the consumer, should be patient with their financial practices. He even stated that you'd likely be getting the worst possible versions of the game on launch day, regardless of the promises made when you pre-order. He's been proven right time and again, Cyberpunk 2077, Redfall, Payday 3, and No Man's Sky being living proof of launch day disasters. I'd guess it's going to get worse before it gets better. The success of Baldur's Gate 3, Helldivers 2, Space Marine 2, and the much smaller indie developers puts a spotlight on how the industry can be better. These publishers and companies can be changed if there's enough criticism and pushback through the language they understand. Money. There's plenty of older titles out there, and preserving them only helps the industry in a more positive light. The strategy is very simple. A game like Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League will come around, could be a small project or a AAA title, and once the backlash starts to peak, everything starts to die down. Then give it a few years for people to potentially forget, and another attempt rises from the underground. Another attempt to exploit consumers for profit, or worse. Which is why we have so many independent sources of information. A lot of reviews can be bought and paid for. Any doubt that you have for a new release, whether that be a remake of a Resident Evil game, a new Doom title, a Star Wars license game, or anything, just wait for the reviews that are trustworthy and have integrity. Inform yourself for your decision. We'll close on a quote from Totalbiscuit.
We live in an age of information overload. There's so much in the gaming medium. There's so much to keep track of. There are so many video games and so many opinions about said video games. Can you really blame somebody for not spending a day doing detailed research on what could very well be a $10 product? No, you really can't. While some of this problem was certainly unavoidable with the nature of the evolution of games these days and the ability to constantly update them with new content and gradually realize a grander vision for the game, some of it absolutely can be avoided by creating a game that works on launch, by not rushing it out, by making sure that it has the feature set that you think people are going to need, that it isn't riddled with bugs and technical problems upon launch. Is that too much to ask? Well, games are certainly more complicated these days, but do you think the consumer cares? They expect a working product on release. I don't think that's particularly unreasonable whatsoever. If games wish to avoid this imaginary situation of retroactive defamation, as odd studios seem to believe is a possibility, then the best way to do that would be to release something that doesn't suck in the first place.
Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments. All sources and quotes are in the description below, whether you agree with my thoughts and takes or if you disagree. If you like this video, click that like button. If you didn't, there's a button for that as well. Either way, I appreciate you've taken the time to listen to this video. This is Arsenal, signing off.